what I'm going to do this morning is not only present a presentation, but I'm also going to show you some tips of presenting. So I'm killing two birds with one stone. All right, so I'll stop once in a while and I'll show you what I've done and I'll tell you what you need to do in your presentation. And then I'll go back to my story. All right? Today I want to introduce to you a man named Manjiro Nagahama. My guess is you have never heard of him.
Yes.
Never.
Most Americans have never heard of him. But he was an extremely significant person in both American and Japanese history. And I'm going to tell you his story now. My subtitle is Shipwreck to Samurai. Yeah, do you understand a shipwreck?
No.
No.
Okay. If you're on a boat, you're on a ship. You're on a boat, you're on a ship, and a storm comes and it causes the ship to be destroyed.
Yeah.
That's a shipwreck. Okay? He actually experienced a shipwreck. And a samurai was a member of the elite class in Japan. Maybe you have seen a movie called The Seven Samurai. They're expert swordsmen and things like that. Right. Now, why do I want to tell you about him? By the way, when you do your presentations, you want to have a reasons slide because you want to motivate your audience to listen to what you have to say.
So it's a kind of hook?
Yes,
Okay.
exactly. All right? So, first of all, Manjiro was a man like me who was between two cultures. Right? He was between Japan and the United States, and I also was between the United States. He's also a man like us, all of you, because you also are between two cultures. You're between your home country and you're between the United States, right? So he has experienced a lot of the same things that we're experiencing. Also, his story is a wonderful story of serendipity. Serendipity? Serendipity. Have you ever heard of this word?
Yeah, it has to do with gut, I think. With
Well, it has to do with when you're looking for one thing and you find another thing that's even better.
oh,
Or when something happens that seems like it's bad, but it turns out to be good. His is a wonderful story of serendipity. And earlier in the class, we talked about what happens if you have to transfer to a community college. It seems like it's bad, but in fact it could be good. That would be serendipity. All right? And finally, it really is just a beautiful story. The first time I read it, I thought, I have to share this with my students. And I've shared it with my students many times, and students continue to say, wow, that's an interesting story. So, get ready, because I'm going to take you for a little ride. Now, I want to give you an overview of my presentation, and I also want to point out that your presentations should have an overview slide. All right? First, I'll talk about his life in Japan. He was Japanese. He was born in Japan. Then I'll talk about his life in the United States. And after that, I'll tell you about what happened when he returned to Japan. And then later what happened in his hometown, what happened to him in Tokyo, and what happened in his later life. All right? So it'll be mostly the story of his life, but there are some really important impacts on history that I'm going to stress. Now, first, his life in Japan. He was born in 1827 in Japan. But you need to understand that Japan in 1827 was very different from contemporary Japan. Right? There were at least 3 major differences between then and now. First of all, at that time, Japan was a closed country. It was a closed country. People couldn't come in and go out of Japan. The Japanese rulers closed all the ports of Japan except for one that they tightly controlled. And Japanese people, if they left Japan, they could not come back. If they did, they would be executed. Right? It was a closed country. Another important point about Japan at that time is that it was a feudalistic society. I'm going to write that word for you. Whoops, I want to use black. It was a feudalistic society. Okay? Anybody know what feudalism is?
Yes.
Yeah, what is it?
It's a society based in land.
Yeah, it's a society based on land where, where a local lord owns the land and poor peasants work the land and knights or samurai protect the land, right? It was a feudalistic society, right? And third, it was a very rigid society. Rigid. That means it was not flexible. If you were born a peasant farmer, you would be a peasant farmer your whole life. All right? If you were born in a samurai family, you would be a samurai for your whole life. People didn't change categories. All right? And that's going to be really important to understanding the wonderfulness of this story. Now, Manjiro was the son of a fisherman. His father was a fisherman. So Manjiro also was a fisherman. But when Manjiro was 14 years old, not 14. Forget that. When he was 9 years old, his father died. And Manjiro was the oldest son, so he became the man of the household. And he became a fisherman like his father. However, now he is 14 years old. At the age of 14, he and 4 of his friends were out on the ocean fishing. And a great storm, a very strong storm, drove their boats hundreds of miles away from Japan. And eventually, their boat wrecked on a small, rocky Pacific island. They didn't know where they were. And as I said, the island was rocky. I mean, it wasn't really even dirt, there wasn't soil, it was rocks. Right? Now, these 4 boys were on the island for 5 months. They survived by eating crabs. You know crabs?
Yeah.
Right? That they found on the shoreline, by drinking rainwater that collected in the rocks. And once in a while, large birds, a large bird called an albatross. Let me write that. Okay. An albatross is one of the only birds that can fly from island to island in the Pacific. It's very strong and it has great endurance and it can fly from island to island. So once in a while, an albatross would land on their island. And if they could catch an albatross, they could eat it. All right? But you can imagine, after 5 months on the island, they were not very healthy. They had lost a lot of weight. They were dying. All right? But one day, they saw a boat, a big ship, out on the ocean near their island. They could tell it wasn't a Japanese ship. They had never seen a ship like it before. It was so big. Now, this ship turned out to be an American ship. It was a whaling ship. Do you understand what I mean by whaling? Yeah. Well, you know what a whale is.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, in those days, oil in the Middle East had not been discovered.
Oh.
Whales were the major source of oil throughout the world. If you could, because whales have a lot of blubber, fat, and that oil could be used in candles and candle lights and things like that. So whaling was the major source of oil. So you can imagine it was an important industry. So this American whaling ship was going by, and the cook on the whaling ship thought, I wonder if there are turtles on that island. Because if we can get some turtles, I can make some turtle soup for my crew. Turtle, you know what a turtle is, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So the cook wanted to make turtle soup. So they sent a little rowboat from the whaling ship to the island to see if they could find turtles. Well, they didn't find turtles, but what they found was,
5.
yes, 5 Japanese boys. All right? Now, Manjiro and his friends had to make a decision. If they went with the American ship, if they were rescued, they could never go back to Japan. They would probably be killed. But if they stayed on the island, hoping somehow to get back to Japan, somehow they would probably die. So they chose to be rescued, and they went with the American ship. All right? Now, this American ship took them to Honolulu, which is in Hawaii. All right? Now, Honolulu, Hawaii was not part of the United States at that time. Hawaii didn't become an American state until the middle of the 20th century. All right? Now, Manjiro's friends decided to stay in Honolulu. Manjiro was a special guy. In his 2 weeks on the boat, on the whaling boat, he had learned to speak English. Can you imagine that? Learning English in 2 weeks. The captain and the crew were really impressed with his intelligence, and Manjiro became friends with the captain, whose name was Whitfield. I'll write that. Captain Whitfield. All right? So Manjiro and Whitfield became friends, and Whitfield invited him to come with him to the United States. Whitfield lived in Massachusetts. That was the home port of the boat. All right? So Manjiro went with Captain Whitfield to Massachusetts, and he became the first Japanese person ever to set foot on American soil. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine being the first Colombian ever to set foot on American soil? Right, yeah. Right. Okay? Americans had never seen a Japanese before, and Japanese had never really seen America. Right? So, Manjiro lived with the Whitfields. They adopted him like a son. And he lived with them in Massachusetts from 1843 through 1849. They educated him. He studied engineering and navigation. Navigation means guiding ships. Okay? And he was a really sharp student. He did very well in school. And he did so well that when he graduated, he became the second in command on a whaling boat. Second only to the captain. All right? This guy's really smart. But in 1850, Manjiro decided to take part in the gold rush. Have you ever heard of the gold rush?
Yes.
Yeah, what is it?
They all moved to LA, that area.
Yeah, California.
California to gold rush.
To look
find
for gold. Right. In 1849, 1 year earlier, in 1849, gold was discovered in California, and it caused people from all over the world, not just the United States, from all over the world, to try to go to California and find gold. And Manjiro was thinking, if I can find gold, I can maybe buy my own boat and try to get back to Japan. Because remember, he was the oldest son. He still felt responsibility to his family in Japan. But it was risky because he could be killed. Yes, good. So what he did, in fact, was he did find gold. He was one of the lucky ones. And he did buy his boat, and he returned to Japan in 1851. Now, I'm going to draw a little schematic map of Japan. Okay, these are the main islands of Japan. Tokyo is around here. Okay? Now, when Manjiro returned to Japan, he did not return to the main islands of Japan. He was smart. He said, if I return there, I probably will be killed. What he did was he returned to the island of Okinawa. Okinawa was the scene of a major war in World War II. But Okinawa, in previous times, had been the center of a trade empire. They traded with Japan, they traded with Korea, they traded with mainland China, they traded with Taiwan, Formosa. And the lord of this area wasn't really pleased with the closed country policy. Okay?
He was open-minded.
He was more open-minded, yes. Okay? That's exactly right. So, and that lord's name was Nariakira. You see the name there? Lord Nariakira. Don't worry about pronouncing it. All right? But he arrested Manjiro. After all, it was the law. But he didn't execute him right away. He sent a letter to the military leaders in Tokyo and said, I have this Japanese guy who had been in a distant land called America. What do you want me to do with him? Now that military leader is called the shogun. All right, the shogun was a military leader in Japan during the feudalistic times. All right, he was in Tokyo. And the shogun said, send him to me. So, he was shipped to Tokyo, and the shogun interviewed him 18 times over 6 months. Manjiro, come, I want to talk to you. And he asked him many questions, interrogated him. You understand interrogation?
Yes.
Yeah, it's like when there's a prisoner and you know. And at any time the shogun could have said, off with his head, you know, execute. You can imagine that Manjiro was very scared. But Manjiro held himself very poised and very calmly, and he impressed the shogun. And the shogun didn't kill him. In fact, finally,